Welcome everyone to another episode of the History of Yugioh. Yes, I will be continuing the main History of Yugioh series and I'm currently working on it, but I also received plenty of suggestions on expanding to the history of certain archetypes. So what's better than starting with one of the most beloved and iconic archetypes and monsters in all of Yugioh, the Dark Magician. Before I begin, I would like to encourage you to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video. It really does help me out and lets me know you do like this kind of content. Alright, let's get started. When we think about Yu-Gi-Oh, especially old school nostalgic Yu-Gi-Oh, and if I were to ask you which two monsters do you think of most immediately, I'd be lying if I said most people don't answer with Blue Eyes White Dragon and Dark Magician. This makes sense of course because they're directly tied to the anime by being the monsters we associate with both Yugi and Kaiba. But in the span of nearly 20 years of Yu-Gi-Oh, both of these monsters have developed into incredibly large archetypes with all kinds of support. I'll be focusing on Dark Magician in this video, but if you'd like a Blue Eyes video in the future, let me know as well. Before I begin, I want to clarify that I will only be covering Dark Magician in this video as well as the Dark Magician girl card herself because she's required for a few Dark Magician support cards, but I'm not highlighting her entire Dark Magician girl sub-archetype nor the Magician or Magician girl archetypes. They're all basically different, and I know it's a mess with all this naming, but a lot of us are already used to this after years and years of English localization torture. And the last thing I'll say for now is that because this video will focus on the Dark Magician archetype and support cards, leave a comment and let me know what kind of support you want the Dark Magician archetype to have in the future. Basically, what is it missing? What does it need to get better? I'm always looking to see your perspective on this. But anyway, Dark Magician received its first printing in North America alongside 125 other cards in the first set, Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, released in March 8th, 2002. The card is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense whose flavor text reads, "The Ultimate Wizard in terms of attack and defense." Very general text, but was also technically a lie as soon as the next few spellcasters came along who had more attack and defense. Dark Magician is a monster that in terms of iconic and sheer fame would easily get a 10 out of 10 rating, but in terms of pure stats and as a card, probably a 1 out of 10, as it was already power creeped by the time the Yugi starter deck came out later that month with the release of Summon Skull, a monster who had equal attack but only required 1 tribute. Eventually, when Dark Magician was made into a formidable archetype, I guess you can say that the card itself is deserving of a 6 or 7 out of 10, which is where most people seem to place the card in terms of rating. Although the artwork you see on screen right now is the original Legend of Blue Eyes artwork, Dark Magician has had 7 other alternate artworks printed in its history, for a total of 8 artworks, the most in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! The first alternate artwork, which is by far the most famous of all 8, originated in the Dark Duel Stories Game Boy Color Game Bundle in March 19, 2002, which is a very pricey card today, especially if you have a PSA 10 grade. This printing would receive its first reprint 10 days later in Starter Deck Yugi, released in March 29, 2002, and this is the product that most of us think of when we think of this artwork. The next alternate art released in November 18, 2003 as a part of Yugi the Destiny bundles. This artwork would be reprinted in a few sets right after, such as Dark Beginning 1 or the Spellcaster's Judgment Structure deck. The next version released in April 2011 from the Shonen Jump Volume 9 Issue 4. This one is also a very pricey card today. November 13th, 2015 however, saw the official release of the Arcana Dark Magician from the Yugi's Legendary Decks product. The following version released in August 22nd, 2016 from the Dark Side of Dimensions movie pack. Shortly after that, in Structure Deck Yugi, we got yet a new alternate artwork. And lastly, in April 2019, Dual Power saw the release of yet another artwork. Overall, Dark Magician has had over 40 reprints in history, and you can see this by going to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Database website, which lists every product that has released Dark Magician within those 20 years. Going back to 2002, it's important to know that Dark Magician wasn't even close to being a playable archetype yet. The card was still deemed as that one famous Yugi card, and even though Konami officially made it an archetype very soon enough, it definitely wasn't great by any means. The set that first introduced Dark Magician support was Magician's Force, released in October 10th, 2003, which would release 4 cards. We'll start with the first 3, Dark Paladin, Skilled Dark Magician, and Miracle Restoring. Dark Paladin's effect didn't age horribly, as it is a 2900 body with spell negation that is not limited to once per turn. In addition, Dragon is a very popular type, and so it's not uncommon to see this guy beyond 4000 attack considering it gets the bonus from both fields and both graveyards. The fact that it needs a Buster Blader seems like its big downside at first, and for the longest time it actually was, but after a decade later with support, this fallback is not so big anymore. Still, the lack of protection outside of spell effects is what hinders him in the modern era. The next one is Skilled Dark Magician. Believe it or not, this guy actually saw lots of play when it first came out in 2003, but not for the effect. In fact, many people probably even forget that this card has an effect, as its primary purpose upon release was its big 1900 body. The effect may seem average at first considering it lets you special summon a Dark Magician from basically anywhere, but playing it and trying it out will quickly make you realize it's slower than the 1990 desktop. And the third one is Miracle Restoring. Spell counter decks aren't bad in today's standards, and that's mainly due to the Endymion archetype. But neither Dark Magician nor Buster Blader have anything to do with spell counters, and if you think combining Skilled Dark Magician spell counters with this card is a pure genius, well, I'll let you believe that. The fourth card released in this set was Dark Magician Girl, the girl counterpart with slightly less attack but a whole lot more physical appeal to make the 95% male Yu-Gi-Oh fanbase super happy. So you may be thinking, Magician of Black Chaos? You haven't mentioned that card yet, so who's that? Great question, and you won't find out until I get to 2007 when that card was released. Seriously, for the first 4 years when this card was released, you might as well just cross off that name of the effect because it was literally impossible to get that attack boost considering the card wasn't printed until 2007. Dark Magician Girl has been released with several alternative artworks over the years, but overall the card itself is not played in most Dark Magician decks, because trying to get a good Dark Magician deck to work is already quite the challenge a lot of the time, and adding another high level beat stick just clogs the deck up even more. The following month in November of 2003, the game Yu-Gi The Destiny had a bundle with some cards, one of which was Thousand Knives. Simply put, it was never good. Fissure was already out and Smashing Ground would release in early 2004, and those don't require a level 7 vanilla on the field to activate. Sure, those two can't target the monster you choose specifically, nor can they target face-down monsters, but back then the rule was simple. If you want to remove face-up monsters, run one of these two. If you want to remove face-down monsters, run Knock. Simple as that. The next set to technically release support was Dark Crisis in December of 2003. I'll start by saying that this is one of the only fusion monsters in history to have less attack than one of its materials. Great start. Its effect for floating also only works on battle destruction, which already makes it fairly difficult to trigger. Well, considering you take no battle damage from battles involving this card, just use your polymerization on these two vanillas, one of which is another horrible vanilla fusion, to go -2, then ram this thing into your opponent's huge monster, then special summon Mirage Knight to then destroy that huge monster. Oh, and by the way, it's the end phase now, so your Mirage Knight blows up now. Congrats, you just went like -5 to destroy one monster your opponent controls. And now you're dead next turn. Or, you know, you can just activate Fissure, and there you go, same result. So as you can see, by this point the Dark Magician archetype is nothing but laughable at this point in time. But in March 2004, it finally got its first really good card from Invasion of Chaos. Dark Magician of Chaos. The pre-errata of this card allowed you to get the spell card immediately rather than the end phase, and it had no once per turn clause. This led to so many infinite banish loops and OTKs that over the years, it was limited and eventually placed on the forbidden list until 2015 when it got their errata finally. That's a shame for the Dark Magician archetype because it's legitimately only one good card by this point got banned, and the following card, Dedication Through Light and Darkness, was basically deemed as useless. I'm not saying this card is good by any means, but the fact that it lets you drop a DMOC from basically anywhere except the Banish Zone for having a Dark Magician on the field could have maybe had it see some play if DMOC wasn't limited and eventually forbidden. With the errata though, the card was basically not worth it anymore because it was useless. So now that I highlighted a really good card, let's go backward and highlight a really bad card. So later in March of 2004, Dark Sage was released from the Dawn of Destiny bundle cards. The card is one of the only few in the game that can special summon itself from the deck, so I'll give it props for that because it actually is very unique. But aside from that, nothing ever stood out from this card. The summoning condition requires 2 specific monsters on the field, one of which is a level 7 vanilla with no inherent special summoning effect. And then you literally need a 50% luck effect to happen. Then, if you do, you get rid of that large beatstick to bring out another large beatstick with only 300 more attack, who lets you add 1 spell card to the hand. It's a cool gimmick effect and challenge, but definitely not viable by any means. In June 1st, 2004, Ancient Sanctuary saw the release of one new card, Dark Magic Attack. This was released at a time when Heavy Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster would slowly make the forbidden list, so it eventually made it into the occasional Dark Magician deck a decade later, but considering that Harpy's Feather Duster is no longer forbidden, there is little incentive to run this nowadays. A couple later support cards are able to search this card out, and in that specific way, it does make it better than Harpy's Feather Duster, but in most cases, it's just not worth it. The Reshef of Destruction Game Boy Advance bundle released 3 more cards, Dark Magician Knight, Knight's Title, and Sage's Stone. The first 2 are a series of cards that are way too inconsistent considering they're both main deck cards, and the Dark Magician must be tributed. If it didn't require the Dark Magician to be tributed but rather be on the field to activate, or if Dark Magician Knight was a fusion that could be special summoned by Knight's Title by tributing Dark Magician, it would be a whole different story. But unfortunately, the current state is that it leads to way too many dead draws. It also doesn't help that it's a warrior rather than a spellcaster, so it doesn't get all the great support from future Dark Magician support cards. Sage's Stone, on the other hand, can be decent if you're running both Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl, but it was definitely never prominent throughout history. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie pack in 2004 introduced one new addition, being Sorcerer of Dark Magic. Obviously way too difficult to bring out and all that for a high attack monster with trap negation. It should be obvious, but this never saw play. Speaking of difficult to summon monsters, the Spellcaster's Judgment structure deck in 2006 released one new addition, being Dark Eradicator Warlock. Warlock was one of the unfortunate early structure deck boss monsters who were all terrible, because they were way too difficult to bring out and didn't even have great effects. Warlock was no exception, of course. Later in 2006, however, another related card, Magician's Valkyria, was released. Even in 2006 though, this protection was very underwhelming. If it also had effect targeting protection for spellcasters, it would have actually been decent spellcaster support back in the day, but unfortunately that was not the case. Moving on to the year of 2007, the release of Premium Pack in June introduced 3 new cards to the archetype, Magician of Black Chaos, Black Magic Ritual, and Dark Magic Curtain. The first 2 cards can easily fool someone to think that they were actually released in Spell Ruler and were simply just a bit stronger than Hungry Burger. But the latter is a bit more unique. Special summoning from the deck has always been one of the best places you can special summon from, especially when the cost is simply half your life points. There's a reason why cards like Solemn Judgment are absolutely amazing, but the summon prevention for the rest of the turn is what absolutely killed it. The card might be decent if you're playing older formats where dropping a 2500 beat stick from the deck is actually enough to have a good turn, but in the modern era, playstyles rely too much on special summoning swarming for this card to be of any use at all. The set Gladiator's Assault, released in November 2007, introduced one more card by the name of Magic Formula. Wow, the attack boost of Horn of the Unicorn and the life point gain from Dying Keto all in one card. Broken! Seriously, what in the world is this? Moving on. Dark Magician wouldn't get more support for another 5+ years with a rather odd support, if you can even call it support, released as a prize for the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship in 2012. Legendary Magician of Dark. It's an Xyz monster, but obviously it's a reference to the band Victory Dragon. So why isn't this card banned, you may ask? Because the bottom corner of the actual card says that it cannot be used in a duel. So why did I highlight this card? I have no idea. Let's move on. 2014 was the first year that Dark Magician received any piece of barely viable support since DMOC in 2004. The Dragons of Legend, released in April, brought us 2 additional cards, the Eye of Timaeus and Amulet Dragon. Okay, I said barely viable, okay, don't roast me in the comment section. The Eye of Timaeus is certainly interesting, but not amazing by any means, essentially requiring less materials compared to polymerization, at the cost of having the Dark Magician specifically on the field is a fair trade-off. This at least lets you bring in Dark Paladin without Buster Blader, or if you want to run bad cards, you can bring out Dark Flare Knight without Flame Swordsman. Obviously its intent, however, is to bring out Amulet Dragon without the Dragon Fusion material, but Amulet Dragon is pretty lackluster. A small and usually irrelevant attack boost doesn't make it appealing, but at least it has pretty okay floating into a Dark Magician or some other spellcaster. These two cards at least showed that this was the beginning of Konami's attempt to make it into a decent archetype. Later that same year, EBON Illusion Magician was released as a promotional Shonen Jump card. Although it doesn't mention Dark Magician by name, it couldn't be any more obvious what card it's trying to support. But to be honest, the effect is pretty good for Dark Magician support. It's a real bummer that the summoning condition is kind of difficult. But wait, a rank 6 Spellcaster Xyz monster might be the way to cheese it out, right? Well, if you search it, you'll see that there are literally only 2 cards in the entire game that fulfill that criteria, one of which is an illegal Victory Dragon-like card, so really only 1 card. On top of that, this summoning method will most likely require running Dark Magician Girl, so it's not really going to help your deck with that. Funny enough though, this card actually got better as the years progressed, because you'll see in a bit that it's now much easier to spam Dark Magician onto the field to XC summon this easier. The following year in 2015, Yugi's Legendary Decks released 2 new support cards, neither of which mention Dark Magician by name, but once again, it's pretty obvious what the support is intended for. Black Illusion and Dark Renewal. These 2 might seem good on the surface, but in the end, they don't really do much. Black Illusion offers great protection, yes, but in the end, it doesn't really do anything to either extend your plays or hurt the opponent. It just buys you a turn. It's just a Waboku that also offers card effect protection for specifically Dark Spellcaster high attack monsters. And Dark Renewal is very specific in what it does, and in the end, you break even in cards. You send Dark Renewal and your Spellcaster to the graveyard, but then gain a monster, so you just went -1, but then your opponent lost a monster. So you broke even after all that. Not really all that impressive. The following year in June, the Shining Victory Special Edition released Magician's Robe. It's a decent recursion for what it does, but this card was only a sneak peek of what was soon to come. You see, 2 months later in August 2016, the Dark Illusion was released. The set introduced 8 support cards to the archetype. Yes, 8, many of which were very useful. We'll start with the first 3, Ebon High Magician, Magician of Dark Illusion, and Magician's Rod. While Ebon is not overly impressive, the latter 2 are the first 2 fantastic pieces of support for the archetype. Illusion has a great self-special summoning effect as well as a great Dark Magician special summoning effect, while Rod is your best normal summonable monster in the deck and also offers a fantastic recursion, so you can repeat your combo every single turn. If you're wondering what good spell and trap cards there are for Rod to search though, well, let's take a look. The next 3 in the set are Dark Magic Expanded, Dark Magical Circle, and Illusion Magic. Expanded isn't really all that useful considering it may take a lot for the 3+ effect, and even with all 3 it's not extraordinary for what it requires, but Circle is by far one of the best Dark Magician support cards of all time. The card is basically a draw 1 banish 1, which generates so much advantage long term. This is one that's run at 3 without question, and Illusion Magic is a pretty solid searcher, but be careful about using too many copies of it as it can punish and clog up the hand in some situations. The last 2 from this set are Magician Navigation and technically Toon Dark Magician. Magician Navigation is another great card. Special summon spamming, one of which is from the deck, is fantastic, and the extra negation from the graveyard is a huge bonus. I'm not even going to bother talking about Toon Dark Magician because while it's an amazing Toon support card, it has no business whatsoever being in a Dark Magician deck. Now we're moving on to the famous Dark Side of Dimensions movie pack, which featured 3 new cards, Palladium Oracle Mahad, Dark Magic Veil, and Chaos Form. Mahad is what you can call a free resource upon drawing, but its floating most likely will not trigger because you'll most likely be doing extra deck plays on your turn, so run at your own risk. Dark Magic Veil is basically a more restricted monster reborn. Some Dark Magician decks like to run 1, but others don't because you may not need more than the 1 allowed monster reborn in the deck. And Chaos Form is completely ridiculous, not because it's broken or anything, but because it literally supports 4 archetypes, being Chaos, Blackluster Soldier, Blue Eyes, and Dark Magician. And being a ritual spell, it's also supported by ritual support archetypes. It's obviously designed for certain ritual builds, but the typical Dark Magician deck doesn't really use it. Later in 2016, Legendary Decks 2 introduced 2 additional cards, Dark Burning Magic and Eternal Soul. Dark Burning Magic is a hilarious card of course, but it's more so built for fun gimmicky decks because it's literally not going to go off in more competitive builds. Eternal Soul on the other hand provides the protection from Black Illusion, but for more than just 1 turn while also generating you some card advantage every single turn. Yes, it does have that destruction downside, but the card is more than certainly worth it. The last set to offer Dark Magician support in 2016 was Structure Deck Yugi, which introduced Dark Magic Inheritance. Upon reading it, the effect might seem good, and it kind of is, but it's really not needed if you're running Rod, which basically does the same thing, but it's an overall better card. So in 2017, two separate releases, Shonen Jump Promotional as well as Legendary Dragon decks, released Apprentice Illusion Magician and Dark Magician to Dragon Knight respectively. Apprentice has a little bit of everything and is considered great support, self-special summoning, search on summon, and an honest-like effect. Dragon Knight on the other hand is a bit lackluster. Backrow protection is not horrible, but it definitely should have done something else besides just this. But in April of 2019, the Dual Power product brought us 4 more additions to the archetype. The first 3 are Dark Cavalry, Magician of Chaos, and Bond between teacher and student. Dark Cavalry is basically just a big beater with decent negation, and it can be brought out with the Eye of TIMAEUS, but it's usually just a card that's ignored and passed along for other better cards. Magician of Chaos has a good effect, but being a ritual monster requires you to change your deck to cater around ritual support and running chaos form, and more often than not, while good, it's not good enough to build a deck around. And Bond also has a good effect, but again, requires Dark Magician Girl. These cards are all good in their very own way, but require a large shifting to cater to them, which isn't necessarily bad, but also not great. The other card from the set, however, is Dark Magic Twain Burst. Similar to Dark Burning Magic, it's a hilarious card that allows you to OTK if you run both Magicians. Have fun with it, but not really all that useful in the high-end competitive scene. In 2019, the Gold Sarcophagus Tin released Magician of Black Chaos Max, which was a retrain of the original ritual monster from 2007. Once again, a pretty fun card to use, but not quite great enough to center your entire deck around in a ritual build. Still, it's a pretty nice retrain though. At the beginning of 2020, however, Legendary Duelist Magical Hero was released, which introduced 5 additional cards to the scene. The first 3 are the Dark Magicians, Magician's Combination, and Secrets of Dark Magic. The Dark Magicians is regarded as one of the better fusion supports, but only if you run Dark Magician Girl. Drawing every turn in addition to material recursion offers fantastic field presence in the long run. Magician's Combination certainly has a very odd negation effect, but it also requires you to run both Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl. In most cases, it's not really worth running. And Secrets of Dark Magic is basically an archetype-specific polymerization or ritual spell, meaning it's searchable. Definitely worth running over polymerization, but usually there's no need to run it in modern builds, as there's already plenty of support otherwise. The next 2, however, are Magician Souls and Soul Servant. Do I really need to explain these? Max out on Magician Souls and run at least 2 Soul Servant. These are 2 cards that significantly boost the Dark Magician archetype in so many ways that it's a lot better now. Seriously, the archetype did get a huge boost when compared to before this set to after this set, so that shows a lot about these cards. Speaking of great support though, this brings us to the very last set in history with Dark Magician support, the 2020 Tin of Lost Memories. There were 3 cards, and the 3 cards are Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, Destined Rivals, and Strength and Unity. Red Eyes Dark Dragoon might as well just say, when you special summon this card, you win the game. Destruction and targeting immunity on a card that can destroy a monster and burn the opponent at the same time, while having a once per turn Omni Negate that also grants it a permanent 1000 attack boost is absolutely ridiculous, and a game ender most of the time. The only downside about this card is people are still constantly trying to find ways to crank out this guy faster. And immediately when people find out the way, this card is easily going to get on the ban list, no doubt about that. The nice thing about Dark Magician decks though is that as long as you have at least 1 Dark Magician on the field and the Eye of TIMAEUS in your hand, you got yourself a Dragoon. The next 2 cards however are a bit odd to say the least. Destined Rivals is essentially a 1-turn archetype specific negation, which is useful but typically not good enough to merit running. And Unity may seem great if you're ritual or fusion summoning, but if you're going for Dragoon, you won't really even need the bonus from this card. You're better off running cards that can get you to Dark Magician or Eye of TIMAEUS a lot quicker, so you can crank out Dragoon a lot faster. And that's it for the Dark Magician archetype. It's a big one for sure, there were a lot of cards on this list, but hopefully you found it helpful. The Dark Magician archetype has definitely received plenty of support throughout, especially in the last 10 years or so. But even with that, the archetype has never truly been at the top competing for the competitive scene. And compared to its other counterpart, the Blue Eyes archetype, the Blue Eyes archetype has generally been the better archetype and has actually seen some high-end competitive play. It's unfortunate, but a lot of us are always waiting for a lot of support for this archetype. And as I mentioned before, leave a comment and let me know what kind of support you want the Dark Magician archetype to have in the future. Basically, what is it missing? What does it need to get better? I'm always looking to see your perspectives on this. As always, I encourage you to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those notifications if you enjoyed the video. Bye bye everyone. Have a great day.